About 6,000 years ago, a remarkable people emerged in the Near East. They built the world's first cities, invented writing, and laid the foundations of civilization as we know it. Their gods were fierce, their kings powerful, and their innovations still echo in our modern world. So who were they? Where do they come from, and what happened to them? Today, we're diving into the story of the Sumerians, the first civilization in human history. This is southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers flow into the Persian Gulf. It's a land of clay and reeds, with no forests, very little stone, and a serious lack of metals and other natural resources. The Tigris and Euphrates flood regularly, leaving behind rich, fertile silt. But unlike the steady, predictable floods of the Nile, these rivers often change course, turning large areas into swampy, uninhabitable land. And yet, it was in this harsh environment that the first great civilization, the Sumerians, took root. The origins of the Sumerians are still one of history's biggest mysteries. Before they appeared, the region was home to two key archaeological cultures, Ubaid and Uruk. The Ubaid people built irrigation systems, mud brick temples, and made pottery. Then came the Uruk culture, which started building the first real cities and monumental temples, and developed a form of proto-writing using clay tokens. The Sumerians arrived somewhere near the end of the 4th millennium BC. There are a few competing theories about where they came from. Some scholars think that the Sumerians were native to Mesopotamia, direct descendants of the Ubaid and Uruk cultures, but linguistic evidence points to the opposite. The Sumerian language isn't related to any known language. Even the names of major Sumerian cities like Ur, Nippur, and Lagash don't come from Sumerian. In fact, they were already settlements at these sites before Sumerians showed up. River and lake names, too, were borrowed. And many farming terms like a plow, a farmer, and to sow came from other languages. All of this suggests that Sumerian speakers arrived in the region and adopted parts of the local culture. So where do they come from? According to their own myths, the Sumerians came by sea from a paradise island called Dilmun, what we know now as Bahrain. And indeed, archaeologists have found traces of Sumerian presence there. But the Sumerians show up in Mesopotamia much earlier than any evidence from Dilmun. Polish Assyriologist Marek Stępień suggested that they might be related to the people who later founded the Indus Valley civilization. Others have proposed origins in Anatolia, the Caucasus, the Arabian Peninsula, or even Tibet. But the truth is, we still don't know for sure. Their origins remain an open question. Around the turn of the 4th to 3rd millennium BC, something extraordinary happened in Mesopotamia. Simple settlements began to grow into full-fledged cities. It was a real turning point in human history. As populations grew denser, not everyone had to farm or herd animals anymore. People could now focus on other tasks, leading to specialization and the division of labor. Alongside farmers and herders, there were now artisans, merchants, managers, priests, and warriors. What made this possible were the Sumerians' advanced irrigation systems. To deal with the unpredictable floods of the Tigris and the Euphrates, they built a vast network of canals, dikes, and reservoirs. A city-state's size and influence depended directly on how large and efficient its irrigation system was. On average, a Sumerian city managed around 300 square kilometers, a landscape crisscrossed by canals and covered in farmland. That's roughly the size of Queens in New York City. Maintaining such a system took thousands of people working in sync. Over time, those who organized and oversaw this work rose to power, forming an elite class. And so, in the effort to control the waters of Mesopotamia, the world's first urban civilization was born. In southern Mesopotamia, dozens of cities emerged: Uruk, Ur, Kish, Lagash, and many more. One of the most important was Nippur, the religious center of all Sumer. It housed the temple of Enlil, the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon. Altogether, around 20 city-states developed within a relatively small area, often competing and warring with one another. Each city was governed by an ensi, not just a political leader, but also the high priest and chief administrator. The NC was responsible for overseeing irrigation, organizing construction projects, managing temples, collecting taxes, and performing religious ceremonies. His title literally meant the one who divides the temple land, since all land was believed to belong to the gods. But the NC didn't have absolute power. His decisions were checked by a council of elders, respected members of the community, and by citizen assemblies called to discuss major public matters. In some cities, the NC also commanded a temple guard, an armed force that protected sacred property. In others, especially during war, a separate leader was chosen, the Lugal, which means big man. At first, the role of Lugal was temporary, meant for emergencies, but over time it became permanent and eventually hereditary. As Lugals gained more authority, they took control of the military, administration, and religion, while the NC gradually became a subordinate figure, more like a mayor or a high priest under royal authority. This shift marked the rise of monarchy in Sumer. Leaders were no longer elected by the community. Instead, power was passed down through family lines. And standing at the head of the state was no longer a community elder, but a king. At the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC, Sumerian society entered a new chapter. City life became more organized, and ruling dynasties began to firmly establish themselves across the region. Our main source for this era is the famous Sumerian king list, recorded on the Weld Blundell Prism. This unique document lists rulers from different cities, starting with legendary times. According to the list, the earliest kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, clearly mythological. But as the list moves closer to real historical periods, its entries become more reliable and are backed up by archaeological evidence and other written sources. The early dynastic period was marked by political instability. City-states were constantly at odds, and some rulers managed to briefly dominate their neighbors. King An-Mebaragesi of Kish and his son Aga, for example, controlled a large area stretching between Kish and Uruk. Other leaders like Eannatum and Meselim also created alliances of several cities, but these coalitions never lasted long. Kish was the early center of power, but over time, leadership shifted to Uruk. Still, even with frequent wars and conquests, there was no true unification. Each city kept its own identity, its own customs, and its own patron god. This period was a turning point for Sumerian civilization. It was then that the basic political, religious, and cultural institutions took shape. Institutions that would later be borrowed and adapted by other Mesopotamian cultures. The early dynastic age laid the foundation for what came next, the rise of territorial states and the first real attempts to unify the region under a single ruler. The development of writing was a slow process that unfolded over thousands of years. It all started with the basic needs of early farming communities. Once people began producing food surpluses and trading goods, the need to keep records became essential, and that's where writing began. In the beginning, people across the ancient Near East used small clay tokens to represent goods like livestock, grain, or textiles. One token might stand for a sheep. One token meant 1 sheep, or 10 tokens meant 10 sheep, and so on. It was a simple system of accounting. Then, around 3300 BC, temple officials in the city of Uruk came up with a brilliant idea. Instead of storing the tokens themselves, why not press them into soft clay to record the information? This small change sparked the earliest form of writing. Soon after, people started drawing basic images or pictograms directly into the clay. A sheep, a loaf of bread, a person, each symbol standing for something concrete. At first, the system was large and clunky, with over 2,000 different signs, many of which still looked like the original tokens themselves. But over time, writing became more sophisticated. Symbols started to represent not just objects, but also actions and ideas. A picture of a foot, for example, could mean foot, but it also could mean to walk, to run, or movement in general. Writing was becoming more flexible, able to express not just things, but thoughts. Over time, these signs evolved into becoming increasingly abstract, making writing faster and more efficient. Then the Sumerians made another giant leap. They realized that symbols could represent sounds, not just meanings. In Sumerian, the word T meant arrow, and it had a specific sign. But once writing shifted to a phonetic system, that same symbol could be used anywhere the sound T appeared, regardless of the word's meaning. This made it possible to write full sentences with grammar, tone, and all the complexity of spoken language. Sumerian scribes used a reed stylus to press marks into soft clay at an angle, which left wedge-shaped impressions. That's why we call the script cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. Cuneiform didn't stay confined to Sumer for long. It spread widely and was adopted by the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Elamites, Hittites, and many others. It became the standard writing system for recording everything: trade deals, laws, myths, letters, and even literature. Clay, as it turns out, was an incredibly durable material. More than 1 million cuneiform tablets have survived to this day, and archaeologists are still uncovering new ones. Because of them, we know a great deal about the ancient peoples of the Near East, their daily lives, their beliefs, their economies, and their stories. Beyond inventing writing, Sumerians came up with a surprising number of innovations, many of which are still a part of everyday life today. One of their most important inventions was the plow. It revolutionized farming by making it more efficient, which meant fewer people had to work the land. That freed up time and labor for new kinds of work: potters, smiths, merchants, and scribes, and helped kickstart a more complex, specialized society. Their most famous invention, though, is probably the wheel. The earliest wheeled carts were likely used in religious rituals to carry statues of gods, priests, or rulers. Eventually, the Sumerians developed the first war chariots, though instead of horses, they used donkeys. So instead of cavalry, they had what you might want to call donkeyry. In architecture, the Sumerians were ahead of their time as well. They were the first to build with arches and columns, laying the groundwork for many principles of modern architecture. Using just mud and reeds, the only materials that they really had, they built impressive and long-lasting structures. Their most iconic buildings were ziggurats, massive, terraced temple towers that seemed to reach towards the sky. The Great Ziggurat of Ur is the best-known example and is thought by many to have inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. We also get a glimpse of their craftsmanship from the local tombs of Ur, where archaeologists found stunning artifacts, intricate jewelry, harps, statues, and even board games, all crafted from gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and other precious materials. The level of skill is astonishing, even by modern standards. Even something as ordinary as soap was a Sumerian invention. They were the first to mix animal fat with lye to create an early form of soap for washing. And yes, they also invented beer. The Sumerians were the first to develop a brewing process, and they even had a goddess of beer and brewing named Ninkasi, whose name literally means lady who fills the mouth. Beer was the drink of choice in Mesopotamia, far more common than wine. Without hops, it wasn't bitter, more sweet and porridge-like. They often added honey or fruit to improve the taste. Since they didn't filter it, Sumerian beer was thick and chunky, and people drank it through straws from large ceramic jars. The Sumerians' most influential contribution to mathematics was the invention of the base 60 number system, also known as sexagesimal. But why 60? It came down to how they counted. Instead of just using their fingers, they counted the 12 finger segments, or phalanges, on one hand, while using the fingers of the other hand to keep track of each set of 12. 5 fingers times 12 segments equals 60. That's why we still have 24 hours in a day. That's twice 12, 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, and 360 degrees in a circle, all thanks to Sumerian math. Sumerian mathematics were incredibly advanced. They could solve quadratic equations, calculate areas and volumes of various shapes, and understood geometric similarity. Long before Pythagoras, they recognized the relationship between the sides of a right triangle, a concept we now know as the Pythagorean theorem. They were just as forward-thinking in astronomy as well. The Sumerians compiled the first star catalogs, tracked planetary movements, and even learned how to predict solar and lunar eclipses. These observations weren't just scientific, they were deeply tied to their religion. The Sumerians believed that the positions of celestial bodies affected human fate, laying the foundation for what we now call astrology. Their calendar was based on lunar cycles, with 12 months of 29 to 30 days, totaling around 354 days in a year. To keep it in sync with the solar year, they occasionally added a 13th month. Even the 7-day week traces back to Sumer. Each day was associated with a known celestial body. That legacy lives on in the names of the days: Sunday for the sun, Monday for the moon, Saturday for Saturn, and so on. The Sumerians were also legal pioneers. They created some of the earliest known law codes, centuries before the famous Code of Hammurabi. These early laws covered everything from trade and property to marriage, inheritance, and criminal offenses. They reflect a strong concern for justice and order, and an effort to build a society guided by clear rules. Education was another cornerstone of Sumerian society. Students, mostly boys from elite families, were taught to read and write, and studied subjects like mathematics, astronomy, law, literature, and religion. These schools served as cultural centers, preserving knowledge and passing it down through generations. In the end, the Sumerians didn't just invent writing, they laid the intellectual and institutional foundations of civilization itself. Pretty cool, huh? For centuries, the Sumerians and Akkadians coexisted in Mesopotamia. The Akkadians, a Semitic people, initially settled in the north, but over time their culture began to merge with that of the Sumerians. The two civilizations grew increasingly interconnected, influencing each other in everything from religion to government. A major turning point came in the late 24th century BC, with the rise of Sargon the Great, a figure often credited with founding the world's first empire. His story, part legend and part history, begins with a myth. Born to a priestess of the goddess Inanna, baby Sargon was placed in a reed basket and set adrift on the Euphrates River. A gardener found him and raised him. As an adult, Sargon rose to prominence at the court of Kish, eventually overthrowing the king, seizing power, and launching a sweeping campaign to unite all of Mesopotamia. Under Sargon, the Sumerian city-states were brought under a single rule, and the Akkadian Empire expanded far beyond their borders. His domain stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, and from the Zagros Mountains to the edges of the Anatolia, the first known attempt to create a centralized, multi-ethnic state. To manage his vast empire, Sargon appointed governors and stationed garrisons across conquered territories. His military campaigns extended into Syria, where he destroyed the powerful kingdom of Ebla, and into Elam, where he captured its capital, Susa. Akkad became the dominant power in the region, controlling trade routes and vital resources, the first true superpower in recorded history. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, took the empire even further. He crushed the rebellions in Sumer and Syria and adopted the bold title, King of the Four Corners of the World. He was also the first Mesopotamian ruler to declare himself a living god, a radical move that redefined kingship in the ancient world. Under Naram-Sin, the Akkadian Empire reached its peak. But that golden age was short-lived. Trouble soon came from the east. The Gutians, a tribal people from the Zagros Mountains, began raiding Mesopotamian cities. Around 2200 BC, their leader Eredupizer defeated the Akkadian army and captured the sacred city of Nippur. He even had his victories carved into stone, one of the few surviving records of that chaotic time. Though some Gutian rulers were defeated, one, Sarlagab, was even captured by the Akkadian king Sharkali-Shari. The empire was already crumbling. After Sharkali-Shari's death, the Gutians launched a full offensive and quickly took control of most of Mesopotamia. This period is often referred to as Mesopotamia's first dark age. As mountain dwellers, the Gutians had little experience with the complex irrigation systems essential for life in the river valleys. Agriculture suffered, canals broke down, and much of the economy collapsed. Many cities were abandoned, and only in the remote, swampy south did traditional Sumerian life continue more or less undisturbed. The Gutians never managed to establish a stable government, and over time, their control weakened. They faced growing resistance from Akkadians, Elamites, and Sumerians alike. The final blow came from Utu-Hangal, the ruler of Uruk, who around 2120 BC defeated the Gutians and drove them out of Mesopotamia, bringing an end to over a century of foreign rule. After the Gutians were driven out of Mesopotamia, a new power struggle began among the liberated city-states. Not long after the death of Utu-Hangal, leadership passed to ur-nammu, the founder of what became known as the Third Dynasty of Ur. He succeeded in reunifying Sumer and Akkad under one rule and launched an ambitious campaign to rebuild the region. Ur-nammu's reign is best remembered for the construction of the Great Ziggurat of Ur, a massive stepped temple dedicated to the moon god Nana. Its ruins still rise above the southern Iraqi plains, a lasting symbol of the Sumerian culture revival. Just as important was the restoration of the region's irrigation systems, which had fallen into disrepair under Gutian rule. Rebuilding canals, dams, and reservoirs required massive labor and careful planning. The state under the Third Dynasty became highly centralized and was supported by a well-organized bureaucracy. The government was reorganized into provinces, each run by appointed officials. One of the most interesting reforms was a rotating tax system called Bala, in which each province contributed a set amount of goods to the central treasury, but only for 1 month each year. This system helped ease the tax burden and made resource management more flexible and efficient. The rulers of Ur's Third Dynasty also worked to revive Sumerian cultural traditions. It was during this period that the famous Sumerian king list was compiled, a political document meant to legitimize the new dynasty by linking it to ancient, even mythical kings. Although Akkadian had become the common spoken language, Sumerian was restored as the official language of administration, religion, and literature. But beneath the surface, problems were growing. The centralized bureaucracy that had functioned well under strong rulers became bloated and corrupt under weaker successors. Discontent grew, especially in the northern, mostly Akkadian-speaking regions. Economic challenges were made worse by environmental problems. Over-irrigation had caused salinization of the soil, reducing crop yields and leading to food shortages. Some scholars believe that by the end of the Third Dynasty, much of southern Mesopotamia's farmland had been abandoned because of salt buildup. External threats added to the pressure. From the west, the Amorites, nomadic Semitic tribes, gradually moved into Mesopotamia, disrupting trade and farming. From the east, the Elamites, a long-standing rival from what is now Iran, pushed into the region, seeking to expand their influence. The last king of the dynasty, Ibbi-Sin, tried to resist these threats, but his power was rapidly collapsing. The Amorites penetrated deeper into the heart of Mesopotamia, undermining its trade networks and agricultural stability. Finally, in 2004 BC, the Elamites delivered the final fatal blow, capturing and sacking the city of Ur. To the people of the time, the fall of Ur was a cosmic catastrophe. In the Lament of Ur, a powerful literary text from that period, the gods are described as abandoning the city, dooming it to destruction. The poem tells of brutal invaders, looted temples, and desperate mothers fleeing with their children. With the fall of Ur, the era of the Sumerian statehood came to an end. Mesopotamia splintered into smaller kingdoms, many of them ruled by Amorite dynasties. The most important of these would later become Babylon, especially during the reign of Hammurabi around 1792 to 1750 BC. Sumerian disappeared from daily life, surviving only as a sacred and scholarly language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. Its religion, literature, and scientific knowledge were absorbed by the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and other peoples of the ancient Near East. And so ended the story of one of humanity's earliest and most influential civilizations. The Sumerians vanished as a distinct people, but their legacy lived on, in the culture, religion, science, and art of Mesopotamia, and through it, in the foundations of the modern world. Once again, if you've made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. We have a whole team behind this, and we really love seeing you follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations. We put out new content every single week. If you'd like to support the channel and help us make more videos like this, consider joining us on Patreon. You'll get early access to new episodes, work-in-progress updates, and more. Every bit of support goes a really long way. Thank you. You can also leave a super thanks down below if you'd like to give us a little extra boost. It really means a lot and helps us keep going. We hope to see you next time.